Hi, I'm Courtney Gourley, and yes, I'm in my car. I'm not driving. I'm sitting in the parking lot while my children have their um, ninja classes. This is one of the only ways that I get quiet, and I didn't want there to be lots of background noise with my dog and my children. So I figured now would be a great time to do this video. Um, so I wrote my critical issues paper on autism. Um, I've been teaching for 16 years and I had never really heard the word autism before until just a few years ago. And I do believe it's becoming more prevalent in our society. But when I remember, it's still been, I would say, over 5 years ago, which isn't necessarily that long ago. Um, and I had a student enter my classroom, and his mom just mentioned that he was a runner. Um, and I was like, oh, okay. What causes him to run? And she was like, well, he has some sensory things. We have not had an official diagnosis of autism, but our pediatrician has referred us to the Marcus Institute in Atlanta, um, which at the time I didn't know what that was. So I did some research then and talked to some people that possibly had dealt with this type of student. And they informed me that that was an institute for autism. And as soon as I started getting to know him, I could immediately tell there was something uh, different about him than his peers. Um, that were in my classroom with him. So his typical peers, as we would call them. Um, and I just started researching some on autism then because, like I said, I didn't really know much about it. Um, but what I did notice while I was doing research is some of the symptoms he had were for sure um, autism related, autism spectrum disorder. But I also learned how different they could be and like the opposite ends of the spectrum that they could be on because this student was so smart. Like they're all so smart in their own different ways. And there are students with autism who, you know, are on the lower end of the spectrum where they have more verbal communication issues or more academic issues, cognitive issues. But this student had a vocabulary that a kindergartner normally wouldn't have. There were so many things about him that just piqued my interest, um, and made me want to learn more. Well, that student then, moved because that's what kids do. They're in and out a lot based on parents' jobs. And he moved, and I was really sad because um, I was really starting to get to know him and learn more about his personality and the things that maybe were related to the autism. And really, I was just learning more. And then fast forward a couple years, and he came back in a different grade. And he wasn't in my class, but I still got to see him, and I could still see those little quirks, as we could call them, I guess, in him. And again, I was like, "God, it's so interesting. Like, I just want to know what can I do to help these type of kids because I could see that there were days where he was truly struggling um, in the general education setting. But then my husband being a football coach, we move quite often. And I actually had told him that I really wanted to get more into the special education side of being in school, that I needed a change from the general education classroom. I'd realized that some of those students, it was more that they were doing it because there was no really support at home. Whereas I feel like in the special education side of things, parents are very supportive. If their student is receiving special education services, like then they are very supportive of the teachers, which kind of pushed me more towards that side. But also after having that previous student, like it just opened my eyes to what could be. So my husband and I were moving out of that county and I applied for a job in special education. I've been certified in special ed for several years, but just really never taken on that endeavor. And I got the job and I haven't turned back since. So this will be my 4th year in special ed. Um, and for the last 2 years, I've had a student, I'm going to call her Jay. She was introduced into my life a couple weeks after school started a few years ago, and she changed me for the better. She changed my outlook on students, on life, on teaching. So she changed me in a lot of ways, and I thank her for that. I thank God for that as well, for putting her in my life. She is such a special kid. She was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at a very young age. Her parents knew there was something. She was nonverbal until she was almost 4. And she is an amazing, amazing little girl. She faces challenges daily, but she faces them with a smile on her face, and she approaches everything just like, I've got this. Um, and it's just amazing to me. But when I first met her, in education, you always hear the horror stories, I guess, of what it was like with that student previously. And she was coming from a different school. So we had heard these are the things that are happening. And I can't lie, I was nervous. I was nervous about her coming into our school. I was nervous about having to work with her because I was not prepared for what might be with behaviors of students with autism, or just behaviors in general, of how to really deal with those situations. So I was nervous, but I knew that transitions for a lot of kids in special education, especially students with autism who thrive on a schedule, a transition, especially of new teachers, new peers, new case manager, new everything in their life, could possibly be a challenge. And I was nervous of what was to come that very first day. And she faced it like a champ. Like, she can read everything under the sun. And so we told her teacher's name. And I mean, she went down that hall like it was nothing. She was ready to find her class and meet her peers. And it was amazing to see how her peers reacted to her. And they all took her in. They were all loving, and they all wanted what was best for her. And everybody wanted to be her friend, and everyone wanted to help her. And they were all like little moms to her and dads in the classroom. If we asked, hey, can you do this? They were so willing to help. And it was on day 1 that I fell in love with Jay. Um, I'm not saying she wasn't a challenge, or that she didn't challenge me for the better. I spent a lot of time researching and trying to figure out what would work best for her, what would help her in the long run. Um, and it has made me a better person just by being around her. Um, and I have since changed schools, so I don't get to see Jay every day, which is sad, but I still keep in touch with her mom via text and email. I often get pictures and videos, which just make me smile from ear to ear, because seeing where she's come from, knowing where she was at just a few years ago and what she's doing now amazes me. Um, and also I'm very good friends with her teachers still. And so we talk daily. and I love to hear my Jay stories of what has happened, um, because she's just an amazing kid. But thinking back to what her parents went through, when she was developing and learning all of those things, at 2 years old or even a little younger or older, like, it was, I can't imagine what her parents were going through, um, when you see your child not developing at the same rate as their peers that are the same age, and, you know, with Jay, she wasn't speaking, um, until she was 4. And I can remember my own children, like, I was so excited when they were speaking at 1 and saying mama and daddy, and that's just not how that's not how Jay did it. But, you know, going to a pediatrician and saying, "Hey, what's going on? Like, my kid's not talking." I can imagine that that would be difficult as a parent. But that would be, my first stop if that was a concern for me. And that's what Jay's parents did. They took her for her pediatrician appointment and they said, "Look, these are the things that aren't happening. What do I need to do?" And they immediately started speech services. And some of those speech services helped her. It definitely helped her grow. Um, I think she did speech for a while before there was any growth, but um, it's sometimes it's very, I guess, somber, sad that these speech interventions don't work for everyone. Everyone's different. That's just a classroom, that's the world that we live in. Everyone is different and not everyone does everything at the same rates or the same time. Not every intervention is going to work for every single person or every student. And it's crazy to think that about 30% of the children with autism spectrum disorder stay nonverbal or minimally verbal, even after they receive interventions for years. When I read that stat from Tager and Flussberg and Kasari, like, it literally blew my mind that there are that many children on autism spectrum disorder that don't speak. Um, and then I began really looking at the children of friends, personal kids that I know. Um, and I looked at, um, several through social media, and I have 3 friends right now who have children with ASD that are minimally or completely nonverbal. Um, and it blew my mind, like, because until a few years ago, like I said earlier, like, I didn't even know what ASD was, much less that there was a fact that there were people in this world whose kids don't speak. It blew my mind. Um, and that end of the spectrum is hard for people to learn about because the kids don't speak. And if they don't speak, how are we supposed to learn about them or what in their little mind is happening that's causing them not to speak? Um, it presents more challenges than other ASD people. People with ASD who are verbal, or you can kind of tell when they're getting frustrated. And most of them are able to verbalize what is causing their frustration. Or you can see what they're doing and it'll call frustration. But these nonverbal students or children, some of them aren't even school age yet. It's hard to tell what's causing that frustration. And I bet as a parent, it's hard. I know as a teacher, it's difficult to understand when a child needs something and you can't fix it. Um, but there are certain people that they have a special place where that's what they do. I'm not sure I'm quite there yet. Um, I love students with autism. Um, I love all students, but students with autism have a special place in my heart. Um, and their just love of life is amazing. So maybe one day I'll get to work with those more minimally nonverbal students, Jay still had minimal communication, not minimal, but just difficulties with communicating her feelings. For one, like she never wants anyone to be sad or mad or anything but happy. So she did not like if someone was sad in a book or someone got upset. And that was something we had to work through. But now that I've learned those things about her, it was easier for me to work with her on those issues. But just like there's students like Jay at 2 who up till 4 who were nonverbal, there are students who are very verbal, like my previous student. We'll call him W. He was verbal at a very early age, and his communication issues were less of an issue, but they were more like he was on the higher end of the spectrum where he was more high functioning, where obviously since they're high functioning and more verbal, it's easier to evaluate them. So it makes the research more accurate and more valid because it's not something that people are assuming or making a guess. It is more accurate because these kids are able to speak with them. I found it very interesting that there is a component with autism and the brain. So, sorry, my head's itching. There are different things, obviously, you know, with people with different severity levels of autism. There are things, other disorders that they have, ADHD. They can have motor coordination disorders and psychiatric disorders like depression and anxiety. All of these things can be related to autism. They also have more behavior, I guess, behavior issues than some other students because they don't know what's socially appropriate. And with it being such a broad spectrum, it's very difficult to identify one cause of autism. So many aspects have been studied, like genetics, biological factors, cognitive factors, and even environmental factors. And a lot more recently, researchers are focusing on those things to see if they can determine, are there things in our environment? Is it something that can be passed on from parent to child? Like what is the issue, what is causing autism spectrum disorder to grow at such a rapid rate? Because like I said, not knowing what it was even just a few years ago, or really what it entailed. It's like, and the fact that now, I want to say in the last 2 years, I have had 7 students in one school, and we're not a very big school, who all have an outside diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, which I find really interesting. And, you know, brains are hard to study. I mean, you don't want to study a live brain because how can you really, I mean, you can do it through imaging and those kinds of things, but you obviously don't want to cut someone's brain while they're awake. But also, like, you have to think different, it would be different studying it post-mortem. But those I mean, they've done that. They can see some things that maybe the blood flow is a little decreased in those people with with autism spectrum disorder. But even with that information, it's not 100% accurate that there's something in the brain. It's not easy to interpret to tell if that's really a cause. But it was found that the brains of people with autism, when you looked at images, the brain was heavier and a little bit larger size than typical individuals. Now I say typical individual as that's someone who has not had a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and these people, you know, met milestones at a normal rate and those kinds of things. And those brains were studied between the ages of 2 and 4, which is usually when students might be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, because by the age of 2, there's, there's a lot that they're learning, and it could just be they aren't making connections with it yet. So some of that could be related to the fact that before 2, there's a lot of things that your body has to do to get your brain to its normal size, I guess. It's retaining all of this information. And just like a bush, you have to, as it's growing and learning more like a bush, you have to prune it down to make sure it's not overtaking everything. And so research has decided, it's not really completely understood. But maybe some of those interruptions in that area before the age of 2, that some of those connections and pruning, as you would say, weren't done. Interruptions were made and those connections weren't made. So it results in a larger brain size. Who knows? Definitely something to keep an eye out for, though. But like I said, it's so common today for autism to be mentioned anywhere. I mean, I know that even as a teacher, I really didn't know what autism was until more recently. But like I said, it's becoming more prevalent in schools, out of schools. Just in general, it is more and more people are being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And for that to be done, there must be like a social communication difficulty, poor eye contact, not being able to hold a conversation with someone back and forth, understanding social cues, like, if I have my arms crossed, I probably don't want to listen to you right now. Or I'm not in a very good mood, like those kinds of things, not reading facial expressions. But another thing is like repetitive motor movements. I've had a student who he gets really excited and he can hardly contain it. And he just does this all day. It's so cute and I love it. But like simple things like that, or a student who is wants his toys all in a straight line. Those are things to kind of look for. And if things like that don't happen and these little small changes, then and it causes stress on these people, they could have ASD. They usually can become fixated on something or attached to an unusual object. One of Jay's favorite things to work for was dominoes, and she loved to play with dominoes. So that was a reward for her. Most students will want a reward of some type of candy. She did not want candy. She wanted to play with dominoes. And a lot of students at her age then did not know how to line dominoes up, knock them down, all of that. Oh, she did. And they had to be a particular way, and she needed to have a certain number. So definitely those small changes. Oh, if one got knocked over, oh, you better watch out, because if she wasn't ready, then we're going to be standing them back up. So also weighted vests, weighted blankets, all of those things. They like the pressure. It helps keep them centered and ready to work, which is really, really nice. You can see a student who's very anxious and or upset about something. Give them a weighted vest or weighted blanket or a weighted stuffed animal, and you will see that anxiety just disappear. It's amazing. But it's the amount of support that teachers and parents and even direct providers like speech therapists and occupational therapists that are able to give students with these at such an early age. It amazes me how much the student can grow and develop with those supports in place. I know they don't always work for everyone, but being able to be a part of it and see the growth they can make is unreal. And, you know, in education, like you always just want growth. Um, I don't mind it, you know, if you don't know it exactly and it's not 100% perfect. I just want you to grow. I want your brain to grow. I want you to grow, and being able to see how um, Jay has grown in the last 3 years is just unreal. To me, some of the things that she's doing now in school that she wasn't even able to do at the end of last school year in May, it kind of blows my mind. Because you never know with any student what you're going to get on a day-to-day basis, but especially with Jay. And if she comes in and she is on it and she is wanting to work just like every other student, when they come in and they want to work, you're going to see what she really can do. But you know, it's autism is definitely a mystery, because even with all the research that has been done by me, through other people, by other agencies, just trying to determine what causes it, why is it so prevalent, why are more males diagnosed with autism than females, why does it manifest differently in males than females. Just those different questions are always in the back of my mind, and I always read all the time more about autism because, like I said, I want to learn more. I want to help these kids. I want Jay to be successful in life, and it's still a mystery to me as to what I can do to help her get there. But I do know that it's ever evolving, just like education in general, but autism is ever evolving. And it's so intriguing to me. And I just think that the more I learn about autism and the more I'm around these students, the better support I'll be able to provide them, as well as the teachers in their general education classrooms and their parents. So here goes nothing learning more about autism, because like I said, I'm here for the long haul and I'm ready to learn as much as I can. Thank you for letting me film this and send it to you. This way it's makes my life a little bit easier on Friday. I really appreciate that. So yeah, thank you. Bye.